Hello, welcome to Chamber Live, brought to you by the East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce. The views expressed in this webinar don't necessarily represent the views of the Chamber, and they are correct as at the time of recording, which is the 24th of February 2021. 2020 and the early part of 2021 could be summed up with a number of words beginning with C. And before your mind runs away with itself, the obvious one being coronavirus, but we could also use community, collaboration. One word that will stick around long beyond coronavirus, though, is change. We're going to see the lasting impact of this pandemic for years to come. The changes that have been precipitated since last March will be sticking around. And that appetite for change has really been whetted. Businesses, organisations, people are considering how they change their lives, their personal lives, their professional lives and their organisations. And that's what Lucy's going to take us through today, how to do that change smoothly, efficiently and permanently. Let's meet Lucy then. Lucy is the Managing Director and founder of Trueman Change Limited, heading up a growing team of experts. Together, they offer change and project management services with extensive experience across the public, private and third sector. She's been driving change programs in complex organisations for over 15 years. Has spent the last year working with public sector organisations, supporting their post-COVID planning and their recovery. She's a member of the Change Management Institute, a board member at People's Powerhouse, and she's authored a white paper in the last 12 months on change management during COVID. Where priorities and change agendas are often multi-layered, Lucy believes that at the heart of any successful transformation is a strong emphasis on people and culture to ensure that change is not only understood, but supported and effectively delivered. Time to meet our guest speaker for today then, Lucy Trueman. Over to you, Lucy.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you everybody for joining us today. So what we wanted to do for you today is kind of give you a tool that is quite a simple and easy tool to use to really think about the people side of change and culture change, because that's something that does come up quite often for us. So I'll just talk to you a little bit about what we do. I'll talk to you about how we approach that. We're going to have a breakout session where you'll go into groups to talk about the tool in an example, because I find sometimes that helps people to really understand how it's working, and hopefully we'll just leave you with some hints and tips and things to help you think about how change is happening in your organisation at the moment and how you might want to shape that going forward. So I'm going to share my screen and then you can see the slide deck. Is that working okay?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So, first of all, who are we? So I feel like I can't possibly beat that lovely introduction by Simon. That was very kind, thank you. But this is my team. We're a small business. We are based in Blackburn, and we've been working in change management now for a number of years. And we basically help organisations to make change happen. So we do the kind of planning bit, we do the kind of capacity bit, we do as much of that help as we can really, just to kind of get people off the ground. And it's nice to see some familiar faces on this call actually who have either worked with us before, working with us at the moment, or have attended previous events. So hello to everybody that knows us. So what we do is in some organisations we help them very much at the beginning of change. So when they are planning it, thinking through their strategy, how to do it well, looking at how ready they are for change. And to be honest, that's very much where the conversation is today. So it's where we are thinking about what change we need to make. And that's what we're talking about today. We also help people when they're in the midst of it. So people that have started a change program, they need some extra capacity, they might need project management, or they might just need some advice about how to get through it. And we do help at the end as well. So we help people by doing evaluations and lessons learned and kind of capturing how things have gone during the process. So change, what do we know about change? almost everybody I speak to in a professional context has got some sort of horror story about where a change program that has been done to them has been done badly. So we know that when it goes wrong, it can cost money, it has a massive impact on morale, it can make people feel like they're going round in circles, it can take too long, it can be bureaucratic, and it generally leaves people feeling undervalued and frustrated. But we do know that when change is done well and it's successful, it can be really pivotal in organisations. So it can help people to completely change the way they work. It can help to save money. It can help to generate more money. It can help staff to feel empowered. It can help people results and performance to increase. So we know it makes a massive difference, and we know that that difference really does depend on how it's done. As I say, lots of people have got horror stories of where they've worked in an organisation, a change has happened, and they felt that they had no say in it, they've had no control over it, and they felt unheard. So I think that the key thing for me with change is always coming back to people and how they are feeling about it and how we are helping them to understand the change. I am a project manager by trade, and I do love a bit of structure, but I do think often organisations fall into that trap of thinking that if they've got a good plan or they've got the structure that they'll get the benefits. And actually that's not the case. You need both. It isn't actually plans that drive change, it's people that drive change. So you need both. You need that clarity and structure, but you also need to have your people on side. So I wanted to share this with you. Anybody that's got any understanding or knowledge around change management has probably seen this before. It's a very, very popular tool, which is called the change curve. But actually, I'm showing it to you a little bit tongue-in-cheek. And basically, the studies around the change curve very much came from studies around death and bereavement. So there is a challenge there whether we should be comparing changing the way we work to going through a significant loss. So I always use this with a pinch of salt. And the other reason why I think that it can be a little bit dangerous to get too giddy about using this tool is it makes us just explain people's behavior without really interacting with it. So what it does is it allows managers to think, oh, well, that person's in denial and that person's going through bargaining, and not really interacting with the issue. And it's different for everybody. We don't actually go through a linear. So I've updated the change curve for you for what it is like going through change in a pandemic. And this is what I think is a more realistic version of the journey that we are all going through at the moment. And you've probably found yourself that maybe in one part of lockdown you were flying and you were baking banana bread and everything was good. And then in another part you're just hitting brick walls and it's difficult. But what we do know is that what affects how well people go through the emotions with change is how much control they have, how much say they have, and how engaged they are in the process. And I think what is useful about the change curve is it does explain that there is an emotional reaction. There's a lot of talk about how our brains are wired very much to keep us safe and not take risks. So when we're asking people to change, we're actually asking them to take risks. So there is an emotional reaction, and it's very important to understand that emotional reaction, but don't be too driven by it. So I don't particularly want to go into lots of detail about the change curve today because I kind of feel as though it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek and it's something that's nice to be aware of, but perhaps shouldn't really drive us massively. What I do want to talk to you about this model, and this model is my favourite model to use, and it's my favourite because one of the things that people talk so much about when they're talking about change journeys is the culture. So this is a word that comes up all the time. Every organisation I work in, at some point somebody will say we've got an issue with culture. And what I find fascinating about the word culture is it means different things to everybody, and it nearly always means something out there. It never means something in here. So people talk about it as if it's this thing that they don't have a lot of control over. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have organisations that think they have control over it and think that if they put a nice set of values on a poster up on a wall, that's going to influence the culture. And in actual fact, it doesn't. So what this helps us to do, this tool, is it helps us to really delve a little bit deeper into understanding what do we mean when we're talking about culture. When I do a session with leaders about, what do we want the future of the organisation to be, I sometimes ban them from using the word culture because it is something that is so kind of generic and difficult to pin down. And actually, if you make people pin it down in much more specific ways, you get much more traction and much more clarity about what you want to change. And this is a brilliant tool to help you to do that. So the tool itself comes from somebody called Taylor. It was done in the 2000s, but predating that, there is a researcher called Shine who did a lot of work around, and they used similar language, but not quite the same. And they did talk about rituals, but it's basically a breaking down of what do we mean specifically by culture, and what does that mean in your organization, not just generically. And I think that's where the magic happens, is when you really look at it from the lens of your own organization, which is why we do want to do a bit of an exercise with you today so that you can do a practice run of this. So the model basically looks at 3 elements. So the first element of culture, which is the one that most people are talking about when they talk about culture, is behavior. So what we mean by behavior is, what do you see people behaving like? What kind of patterns do you see? What is normal? How do leaders behave? Are they positive? Are they supportive? Or are they negative? But what do you see in people's behaviors? And I'm going to keep using the word "what do you see" because it kind of forces you to nail something a bit more tangible than just talking about what things feel like. So that's the first bit. And to be honest, most people, when they talk about culture, that's what they're talking about. The second 2 people aren't always talking about. So the second one is symbols and rituals. So what this one means is, what can you see happening? What can you see on the walls? What kind of rituals are there? How do people behave in terms of regular routines? So do they have regular meetings? How long are those meetings? What's going on that you can see that might be symbolic of something else? And how might those things influence their behavior? And then the third pillar, and this is one we come up a lot because we work with quite big organisations, so systems and processes. Now, I've done loads of work in the public sector. The public sector, very often quite large organisations, love the processes and the systems. And sometimes a process or a system can have been established at some point in time that's probably a bit out of date now, but it's driving a set of behaviours. So what systems and processes do you have in your organisation, and how might they be impacting people and driving their behaviours? So what are we doing on a day-to-day basis? How much time does that take? Where is our focus? What structures do we have? How do we actually interact with our customers? So I'm going to run through you a real example to help kind of see where this fits in. So I worked with an organisation, a local authority, a number of years ago. They wanted to create a more agile culture. Now that's another loaded word that means lots of different things to different people, isn't it? And particularly after the pandemic, I think we're all learning to be a bit more agile generally. What they meant by it was that they had these kind of pillars and groups of people in the organisation that were working very much separately from each other. They were working in silos. And what they wanted was to be able to work more collectively together. So they wanted their managers and leaders to be able to move around the organisation a little bit more. That's what they meant by agile. Now, what was interesting was, we were asking managers to show that behaviour. So they were very clear, that's the behaviour that we want. When we looked at the systems and the rituals, what we found was that it was very common in that particular council, and there were 3,000 staff, it was a big council, they had directorates, so they had different parts of the business split up, and they had senior managers in those directorates that each had their own directorate team meeting every week. It went on for 3 hours minimum, and they only invited people from within their own directorate. So you're saying to middle managers, we want you to be more agile and move around the council more, but actually we want you to put half a day a week aside to be in this meeting with only the people that you directly work with. So can you see there's a real conflict there from that staff perspective? You're asking me to do this, but this is the ritual that you're pushing me into. Also, interestingly, in the same council, what they had was a job evaluation scheme to make sure that people were paid fairly. It's a very common thing in the public sector. And as part of their job evaluation scheme, you were paid more money based on how many people you were managed. So actually, we are financially rewarding people to empire build. We're asking people to, our systems and processes are forcing people down a road where we are rewarding the bigger the team you have. So again, that's going to affect behaviour by making people focus on their own team and not wider. So can you see there how saying that you want to see a certain type of behaviour, you've got to dig a little bit deeper to see, well, what does that mean? Where am I contradicting that? And it's really common to contradict it. And part of what we're going to think about a little bit later on in the session is that looking in the mirror, because actually we are all influencing culture every single day, whether we're doing it deliberately or not. We are doing it. And I think this tool is a really good way of kind of pushing us a little bit harder to look at how we might be influencing it, and without even realizing. And both of those two examples in that organization hadn't been flagged up as this is a contradiction. So it's really, really easy to get into a place where you're not actually aware that you're contradicting yourself. So that's the tool, is to look at it from those three lenses. What's helpful is to look at it from a current perspective and a future perspective, because that's where you see those contradictions. So the first question to ask is, so under each of those headings, what's happening now? Because you might not have noticed, you might not notice these rituals. They become so part of your day to day. In my business, we have regular team meetings that we've had for a long time that we just keep going with. It's very, very easy to fall into not even questioning those rituals. So have a bit of headspace to take a step back and say, actually, what are the rituals in my organisation and how are they happening? And then the next question is, what should happen in the future? So if you've got an idea of what your change is, of the change you want to make, what would need to happen in the future that be under the heading of behaviours? What systems would you need to have in place? What rituals and symbols would you want to see? So it's very simple. It is literally three headings, and then it's what's happening now and what's happening in the future. So what we're going to do is put you into groups. I don't know how many groups. How many groups, Simon?
I've got 3 groups. With every person that expressed a preference has got their preference. So I feel like I've achieved something this morning.
Thank you. So which are the 3 groups? Because my next slide will be wrong because it's got 4 of them.
So I've dropped 1. So we've got changing core business is group 1, staff and structure changes is group 2, and technology-based changes is group 3.
Okay, that's great, thank you. So what we're going to do is put you into the groups for about 15 minutes, and we're going to ask you to consider your example. So each group will have a specific theme. So one will be around if an organisation wants to completely change its core business or its business processes, what would those things look like? A group around staffing structures. So if a business wants to change its staffing structures, what behaviours might you want to see, what systems might you need to change, and so on. And also, what if it was a change driven by technology? So that might be around remote working, it might be around bringing in a new system. Those are kind of themes, but do feel free to talk about your own organisation if that helps you. And we have tried to put people in groups based on what they said they were interested in when you registered for the call. So you've got a choice. You can either talk about your own, or you can talk about the kind of theme generally, whatever you feel comfortable with. And what you're looking for is, if you look at it under those headings, where might there be some inconsistency? So where might you spot ways in which you're saying you want culture and behaviour to be one thing, or you need to make that change happen, but where are the things within your organisation that you might not have noticed before that are actually working against you, and are going to make it more difficult for you? So nominate a person for feedback, because when we come back together as a group, we're going to ask, how did you find it? Were there any light bulb moments? Were there anything major that you noticed that we need to tackle and talk about a bit more? And you're going to have about 15 minutes together. So if we come back at, it'll be 10, what's 15 minutes from now? 25 to 10:40. Is that right? Does that sound okay?
That sounds fine. 10:40, I'll bring you back.
Okay, so did everybody nominate a person to give feedback? Or does everybody have a person who can give feedback?
Can we split ours between two? We've got two people who could speak in ours, so can they both wanted to have a little bit of a say, if that's okay? So we can split it in half.
So which group were you in, Debbie?
Technology-based group.
Technology-based. So shall we start with you guys then? So whoever wants to speak on the technology.
Do you want to start, and then we'll go to Catherine?
Sorry, did I miss that?
Yeah, Gordon, do you want to just...
Yeah, of course. So technology-based change is something I'm involved with at current organisation quite heavily. And they're quite a traditional company, as it were. So they've grown in size quite significantly. So they've recognised the need to move to a technology-based environment, as it were, although the individual members and colleagues within the organisation aren't necessarily heavily technology reliant. So the challenge we're certainly facing is we need it to be a leadership-led change of working, change of a way of working, although there's quite a strong belief from a leadership that we can't interrupt people from doing their day jobs. And this has led to what I'd probably call failures previously. So it's an organisation I've only recently joined, but their adoption of technology hasn't been largely successful in the past. And I believe it's because there's not always a focus on it. You know, the day job can continue to be done without adopting that technology. And so you don't get that really strong leadership buy-in, even though they want to do it, they recognise its value. They don't push that message downwards necessarily. So you struggle with the adoption from an individual member of staff from their point of view.
Yeah.
It's kind of that, it's the behavioural thing. It's putting into action the behaviours that they talk about, that they say they want to embed and they want to grow. It's then them actually evidencing that, I feel. Yeah.
And did you manage to identify any kind of rituals or processes or anything that might be driving that?
For me, certainly, it's very much they're not used to remote ways of working. So they're an organisation that's spread heavily across the country, and each individual is pocketed, as it were, in terms of the way that they interact and the way that they work together. So you don't get this big sharing of information, certainly not via technology and things like Teams. So they're very much a traditional, you will do face to face and you will come and speak to us on our patch, as it were. So yeah. And heavily paper based as well. There's an awful lot of paper, so there's a reluctance to give up what they see is working at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, anybody else from the group wanted to share?
Yeah, perhaps just to add into that point, and I was looking primarily at the symbols and rituals, and I interpret that by being, this is what's observed. So what do you observe now, and what might you observe where things are different? So if you observe now, so the rituals that you see at the moment would be that people would be in your case you've just given, Gordon, that people would be visiting, going elsewhere. You wouldn't see this kind of event happening. I also would, so it's very difficult. So symbols and rituals are often what's seen, and you kind of have to be there to see them in a sense, or they might be what's in reports written down. They might be what's on the website. There might be messages that are given. There might be descriptions of how things happen. So I think that so if you want that, if things to change and in a technology-based change, there's something that needs to be different about how that message is conveyed. What again, the consistency of message, and how that new message interacts, kind of conveys something which is for all the parties concerned in that change. That links a little bit with who is the change for, and who are the beneficiaries of the change, and making sure that that there's some consistency, or there is some, the right kind of language is used with the people who are the beneficiaries of that change, because that makes it more likely that people would see it as relevant to them.
Yeah, language is crucial and is definitely, I would say, a part of that kind of system, part of that rituals and what you can see, because part of what, I mean, I suppose it's what you can hear rather than what you can see, but the stories that are told within organisations form a big part of their culture. One thing you might want to think about, Gordon, I'm working with an organisation in London at the moment that are struggling with the kind of middle management layer. And one of the things they've identified is that there are a lot of performance dashboards and measures which are very focused on business as usual. So we're kind of asking managers and leaders to think about change and think about the future. But what we're measuring them on is very much things like caseloads, numbers of people involved, and kind of performance. I told you a cat might turn up at some point. Kind of the very much that business as usual focus, which is very symbolic of what's important, and it's a process that is driving a certain set of behaviour. So looking at what they're being measured on might include some things there. Okay, anything else from that group? We okay?
Yeah, but I think that it's it depends also on an individual level what the type of business is. A bigger business will just have so many different things that are being conveyed. A smaller business just doesn't keep the same level of metrics, and it's easier to keep track of numbers than it is to keep track of things like beliefs. Yeah, that's very true. Thank you. So anything from the staffing structures group?
I'll kick us off and then the team can jump in. So we talked, rather than about a scenario generally, we talked about our specific experiences with staffing and structure changes as a result of the pandemic. We talked about things like in some large organisations there might be a mini team culture within the wider organisational culture, and how that can bring challenges as well as employees witness differences in the wider organisation to what they're experiencing. We mentioned inherited processes that might be difficult to change, that have been long-standing, and how obviously that can go against change. We talked about some of the routines that we experience, so meetings for meetings' sake, and kind of what that conveys to people about what's important, and even things down to being stuck on the paper-based systems. So that, that's already been mentioned, but I think there's that holding on to old ways of doing things when it's been done for such a long time, and how we bring staff into the new ways of doing things so that they genuinely, adopt them. And so we talked about, we can see the technology changes and that might be happening, but that doesn't necessarily mean the behaviours changed along with it. We had a lot of questions around, obviously, even when you change your processes and you change some of the symbols, there still might be certain individuals that are resistant to change, that have a more resistant attitude than others. So I think that's quite a challenge for people.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
I would say don't be scared of resistance, though. Some of the best advocates for change were very resistant in the beginning. So I think as change managers, we focus on people that are resisting. The people that are resisting are actually care. So the most difficult people to change are the ones that don't engage at all. So if you've got somebody that's resisting very vocally, it is absolutely worth going and talking to them and understanding why, because they care enough to argue. So we might be wrong and they might be right, is the first thing to take into that. But also they're probably quite an influential person in their own peer, because they're standing up. So I always welcome resistance. I think it's the people that just kind of wade it through treacle and you're never really sure because they never tell you that they don't agree with it, but it's not making any progress. I think they're more damaging to change journeys than people that resist.
Yeah, that's very true. And we also discussed about if you can identify some small wins where you can show that change has a positive impact on those people, it can actually get the buy-in for the bigger changes that you're looking to bring about.
Yeah, there is a lot of theory that, and we make this mistake in big organisations where we think we have to have like 5-year plans. And actually there's a lot of theory that we can only really plan ahead a quarter at a time properly to make it real. So you might need your big strategy, your long-term strategy, but when it comes to affecting people's behaviour and changing how people think and act on a daily basis, you need to be thinking in sort of 3-month windows and making it very real to that person. Yeah, I see loads of communication around change programs and it's like, this is our roadmap, and it's like nobody cares. They want to know what you want them to do differently, like next week. That's what people care about. That's great. Is there anything else from that group? No? Okay, so I was in the group about changing kind of business functions. So who would like to? I can't see actually the person who was in our group.
So I've made some notes, so I'll kick us off, but then if others wanna jump in. So we were talking about about transferring more decision-making power to people, whether that was the communities or customers or students, and the resistance that can be met with. So in terms of behaviors, we kind of talked about this loop of listening, acting on what you've heard and building that trust. That way, we talked about the stakeholders building, kind of moving them from sometimes a more apathetic approach to one that's more engaged, and building that empathy for others, because it's never simple. It's never just one point of view. So building a process that allows people to understand the viewpoint of others, and the big one here being kind of this kind of giving up from the organization's point of view, giving up a lot of decision-making power whilst not really feeling like they have a reduced amount of responsibility, which we were thinking a lot of the resistance might come from, because you feel like, well, I don't get to do all the things that I usually do, but I'm still responsible for it if it goes wrong. So kind of changing those mindsets. And in terms of symbols and rituals, we spoke about language as well. We spoke about symbols of authority and how it can be a hindrance to people sharing and speaking their mind. And then we spoke about the different locations sometimes that different engagement events are held at, and how they can also kind of speak to different levels of formality or be intimidating and so on. And then in terms of processes, we spoke about paper versus online and digital processes as well, and different kind of levels of accessibility and functionality that come with both of those. And then we spoke about the windows that we give people to engage, and how that again can be a hindrance, because we are the ones setting the rules, saying you can tell us what you think, but you have to do it at this time, and it gets taken forward at this time, usually far away in the future. And how if you want to engage outside of that system, it's actually really, really difficult. So that's what I've noted down. I wonder if anyone in my group wants to add anything.
Thank you. I mean, I think our kind of theme was very much around being in an organisation that's able to listen to either customers or residents or students, or depending on what sector you're in. And yeah, I think we did identify quite a few things. I actually hadn't thought about the job title thing in engaging with people, which in local government, which I do a lot of work in, you know, we do like our job titles, and we like referring to people as council as such body, and actually that probably isn't very inclusive for people, for residents to then feel like, well, I have an equal voice in this conversation, even though I'm here in a personal capacity rather than a professional capacity. So yeah, that was a great thing to put a spotlight on. So thank you. I hope that putting it into a kind of real context, or even if it was a semi-fictional context, I hope that helps you in terms of making it real. It is quite a theoretical model, so I think sometimes the magic does happen when you start to apply it. Just got a couple more like little tips and hints and things to share with you. I will just put my screen back up. So things you might want to think about next. So once you've done that kind of exercise for your own organisation and your own change journey that you're working towards, turn those thoughts into actions. I do enjoy this part of a change journey where you're really sort of thinking it through, but I have to say it's the easiest part. The hard bit is turning it into action. So it's quite easy identifying these things that you might want to change, but then it's quite hard actually figuring out how to do it. So make sure you do turn those into actions. The magic happens with what happens every day. It doesn't happen with what you do in a nice workshop with a few leaders in a room and putting some nice ideas up on the wall, as much as that's the fun bit. A bit of tough love now. Look in the mirror. We are all influencing the culture in our organisation every single day. So what have you done, whether it was on purpose or by accident, to influence the culture in your organisation today? Because you will have done things. So have you spoken in a way that is consistent with the change you want to make? Have you demonstrated a process that is consistent? Are you actually helping to kind of set those rituals and routines? What would other people see when they look at you? Would they see behaviours and rituals and symbols that are in line with the change that you want to make or not? The answer is probably not, because we're not always conscious of what we're doing. We often say one thing but do another. So there is something around a culture of honest feedback, which is a tough nut to crack, but very important. But do have a think about that from today, not just what do we need to do 6 months from now. Think about what you're doing every day. Simon Sinek does a bit of a talk about cleaning your teeth, and what he says is when you clean your teeth, it doesn't make any difference to clean your teeth or not clean your teeth one day. What makes the difference is you doing it every single day, and you don't know what day it made a difference. It's the same with being healthy or going to the gym or eating well. It doesn't make a difference the one day you do it. It makes a difference because you're consistent. And I think culture change, that's a really positive way to think of it. My other favourite, very oversimplified change management tool is to ask yourself what will be different. I think if you understand the cultural side of change and you can answer that question, what will be different, in a very real and practical way from different perspectives, you're actually pretty much there with change management, because then you can plan for it. So often we set up a change program and we have some sort of project in place where we say, well, we're going to bring in a new system, but we don't say, so what will be different for the person using that system? What will be different for the customers that interact with that system? What will be different for the managers who manage people who use that system? So that's another, it's probably a whole session for another day maybe, but it's a really simple, powerful question to just keep asking yourself all the time. Do think about capacity. As I said, this is the easy bit. The thinking about it is the nice, easy bit, but undoubtedly there is a lot of work to be done. If you found 10 things in your process that actually need to change, that, you know, there might be a new system needs bringing in, there might be training sessions need doing with staff, there might be various different things need to happen. Somebody's got to make that happen. So one of the reasons why our clients do run into trouble partway through a process is because they think that change change will happen by itself. It's a function in its own right, and often people need extra help or capacity, or you might want to use your own people to deliver the change, but bear in mind it will take them away from their business as usual. So do think very clear, plan for that and decide how you're going to make it happen. And again, a really simple thing in change management is just involve others. I know I made fun of the change curve a little bit, but there is an emotional impact to change, and people, what we know helps people to get through those emotions is a sense of engagement and a sense of control and an ability to input, having a voice, all those things, which actually what we discussed in our group about, having more engagement with customers and communities. That's why it's so important, because people go through a transition much better when they feel like they've played a part in it. So make sure you are involving others in these conversations about what will be different and what the symbols are, so that people can help you to shape that. Just some quick things to think about when you're starting a change program. Be clear on the why. Most people don't want to change just for the sake of it. So make sure you're clear on why you want to make this change happen. How brave are you willing to be? So some people start off talking like they want to be very brave and radical, but as they get into it, really they don't. They just want to tweak things. So get some clarity around where you're at on that spectrum as an organisation quite early on. The capacity we've already talked about, the engaging the right people. I don't want to go into kind of boring project management terms like stakeholder mapping, but there is some very simple thing of just thinking, who's affected by this change? Who do I need to involve in this? And do think it through. Again, I know I've said that's the easy bit, but do think it through. Think about who's impacted, think about who needs to be involved, think about what those changes will be. And hopefully this tool that we've run through today will help you to certainly think about culture in a more in-depth way. This is a quote. It's not really a quote, it's a made up one, but everybody talks about evolution as being survival of the fittest. That's not actually true. It is survival of the adapt is really, really important, and our ability to adapt and tweak our approach is something that will help us to evolve going forward and make us stronger going forward. I actually used to use this slide and people were like, oh yeah, now we've had a pandemic, I think people know this. I think they know that the importance of being able to adapt, sometimes a little bit kind of on the hoof and with not too much guidance or help, but yeah, it is just to remember that this is a good thing. It's a positive thing to be adapting and changing all the time. So in terms of keeping in touch with us, we'd love to stay in touch with you. We have done a white paper, which some of you may have already downloaded, because I think that Debbie kindly sent the link out to everybody. We've been researching, speaking to organisations in all different sectors over the summer to really understand how they've managed to make change happen so quickly. So one of the things I think for us as a change management community to really think about is, what do we learn from the pandemic? Because things that previously we would have expected to have taken months, if not years, happened in hours, if not days. So there's a lot of learning to be had there, and we're starting to pull that together. We've done a white paper which you can download off our website. I'm hoping to turn that into a book. So if you feel that you can contribute to that and tell me your story as an organisation and how you managed to get through the pandemic and how you managed to make change happen so quickly, I would really, really love to hear from you. Do think about your kind of capacity and your readiness. We do have a tool available for that, where we do a survey and a kind of diagnostic of your organisation. So get in touch if you'd like to know more about that. And do follow us on social media, which is my last slide, because we do make videos and we share free tools. So do follow us and keep in touch with us so that we can keep helping you going forward. And I think that's probably everything from me. Do you want me to stop sharing and hand back over, Simon?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Lucy. We'll include all those contact details, and there's a handout coming in the follow-up email as well. We've got a few minutes if anyone's got any questions they want to put to Lucy, either on the model, on behaviours, symbols, systems, processes, or on maybe on something wider on change. Don't be shy. We don't need to use the chat box, it's quite a small group, so feel free to just unmute your microphone if you want to put something in. I love that silence. I'll throw one at you, Lucy. For me, the last 12 months have been a really good example of how you can very quickly overcome behaviours and blockers in an organisation when you really have to. I remember my first day at the Chamber, I was told there's no way we can access our CRM system outside of the Wi-Fi network in the building. It's just not technically possible. And then all of a sudden an epidemic comes along, and within 3 days that's been made technologically possible, and we're still doing it now. So for me, that's about personnel and about those behaviours and people entrenched in their behaviours that Gordon mentioned earlier on. What tips have you got? And every organisation's got them. Maybe 10% of people that don't want to change, that have always done it this way, but that 10% can stop a change in its tracks. So what tips have you got for overcoming that 10%, or persuading or bringing that 10% along with you? Because we're not going to have another pandemic, God willing, that forces that change.
No, I mean, the first thing is to understand them, because I do always start from the assumption that maybe they know something I don't. So it is always worth understanding that. And I have been, as an employee in organisations in the past in my career, you know, witnessing a change programme and knowing that it was a bad idea and being very vocal about it. So it's not always a bad thing that people are resistant. And I do think that a lot of change management models and tools and techniques start from the premise that resistance is a bad thing. It isn't. Start from the premise that it's a good thing. And then you've got to work with that person to understand what their issue is. And, you know, I'm a big fan of coaching techniques, even if it's not, you know, a proper coaching, formal coaching session, but actually just questioning to understand why is that resistance there. You will always get a proportion of people that don't want to change. It's quite ironic, actually. My partner, who I'm supposed to be marrying this year, but it's probably going to be next year now, he is very, very anti-change, and I just think, how have you ended up picking me? Because I'm like the opposite. But he is just very, very anti-change, and his starting point is always no. But for him, it's understanding the why and what's driving that behaviour, and I think that's true in a professional context as well. If what's driving that behaviour is out of line with your values as an organisation of where you want to go, then, you know, you may get to a point where you have to look at exiting people that, you know, for reasons to themselves, that, you know, it might be to do with empire building, it might be to do with their own power base, and they just will not budge. And sadly, there are some people that are just in the wrong organisation. But in my experience, it's often not the case. It doesn't often get that far. And there is the whole tipping point thing of, you know, if you can identify a few champions of the change and you can start to shift the overall messaging, a lot of people will go with it. So focus your energies on your positive people and your very negative people, and your middle bunch will move along with the flow. But yeah, it's understanding why and what's driving that behaviour, because they might know something that you don't know. And what was previously acceptable before the pandemic in terms of technology, of, well, if it's difficult, nothing with technology is impossible. So it's maybe just that it was difficult. Well, suddenly we had this burning platform where we absolutely had to do it. So then it becomes less difficult because the risk becomes, it outweighs. So yeah, that was a bit of a rambly answer, but I think it is understanding them and understanding why.
Okay, thank you. Last chance for any questions. Oh, Catherine.
Yes, thank you. No, it's been a really interesting framework for looking at change. What I was just thinking, in your discussion, it's very much about the kind of the organisational level and all the organisational features. Obviously, an aspect of change has to be individual, has to be people. And now, and clearly it's too much to bring in now. But what I was just wondering about was often an excuse for not making change is saying something like, well, our people, we've got to take into account people's well-being, or something like that, or we've got too many people who are taking sickness absence or whatever. And so I'm just wondering about how you kind of take into account the fact that actually the change may actually make things better for people. They'll feel more energized, which actually will improve sickness and will improve people's collaboration and all those other things. And so I'm just wondering almost which way round that sort of thing can happen. Is it that change can come, or is it that people need to be energized enough to contribute to the change?
I mean, well, I'm not an expert in well-being. What we do know is that when people are going through a change program, if they feel like they're not engaged in it, that massively is detrimental to their well-being, because they feel powerless and out of control of it. So I think change done well is about engaging with people, and I think most people want to go to work to do a good job, and if there's a way of doing a good job easier, they want to engage with that process. Now, there are some examples, you know, I've done a lot of work in local government where sadly there's been huge austerity measures, and a lot of changes that have happened in local government have basically been around reducing costs, which is not a driver for the average person, and is difficult for people to engage with. But I think the sooner we can talk to people about change and get their input in that, the better for their kind of general mental health and well-being that is. A mistake that a lot of people make is that they don't want to talk to people until they're 100% certain of everything. Now, I get that, because people have been burnt, but being open and transparent about that we're not 100% certain, so let's try and figure this out together, is a much healthier starting point than keeping people in the dark and then suddenly hitting them with the, right, this is a change that you've had no say in. That will make general kind of morale worse, I think.
Yes.
And also you won't get as good ideas. People on the front line know how to make it better.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, if people are not involved and you're not open and transparent, there's a lot of uncertainty, and that makes things plummet. And so people get cut off because they're not feeling that they're involved. So it goes the wrong way. So it is, I think, yes, you're right. It's, I think that being open, even if you're not sure where you're going, it's actually better to say that we are considering doing this for this and this reason, and somehow involving the people in doing it will work both ways.
Yes, yeah, I agree, definitely.
Great, thank you, Catherine. We've all heard the phrase "no final decisions have been taken," but I'm not sure we've always heard it when it's actually been true. Certainly some of the changes I've been through in previous organisations, I'm fairly sure everything had been predetermined, and you're right, Lucy, it's demoralising and doesn't always get the best change at the end of the process. Okay, we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Lucy, and to the team at Trueman Change, and to your cat. We didn't get the cat's name.
The one that showed up was called Heather. I have another one called Maya as well.
All right. Well, thank you, Heather, for showing, and Heather will be immortalised forever now on YouTube as well. So she's had 3 seconds of fame. We will be sending round in Debbie's post-event email a full set of handouts and slides and all the contact details for Lucy and the team at Trueman Change, and the link to download the white paper. Please do connect on social media, both with East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce, but also with Trueman Change and the team from there. And do follow up and keep that change conversation going. Please also do take a look at chamberlive.co.uk and choose your next Chamber of Commerce webinar to fill the time during what's left of lockdown, because we'll soon be back out doing meetings in person, hopefully. All right, have a great day, everybody. Thanks very much. Thanks for watching this Chamber Live video from the East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce. If you've enjoyed this content, then you might enjoy some of the other content that's on the screen now. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel.